He said he wants to make America great again, a more assertive superpower with much punchier economic growth. Tomorrow, here in Washington, Donald Trump gets his chance. Today, the changing of the guard began as America's next first family arrived in their new home city. We are with some of Mr. Trump's many supporters tonight as they flood into Washington. What do they think he means by make America great again?
I'm believing we're going to have more unity, more jobs. I think it's like happy days are here again.
Beyond these shores, the world waits nervously. In the Baltics, they are readying their defences, concerned about Mr. Trump's ties with Russia. Here, many in the media wrestle with how to deal with a man who basically can't stand the sight of them. Also on News at 10 tonight. War and Peace. Former IRA commander turned architect of peace, Martin McGuinness, says he's retiring due to ill health. And True Blue Surrey says it's putting up council tax by a whopping 15% to deal with the social care crisis.
From Washington, this is ITV News at 10 with Tom Bradby.
Good evening from Washington. Take a step beyond the inflammatory rhetoric and the name-calling, and it's not hard to see why Donald Trump is going to be sworn in as president in the building here behind me in 18 hours' time. He has promised much more aggressive economic growth, much lower taxes, and a country more visceral in the pursuit of its national self-interest. Well, tomorrow, he gets his chance. As his supporters flood in from all over America, the mood of the capital is probably best described as portentous, for good or for ill. These next 4 years are highly unlikely to be business as usual. A short time ago, the soon-to-be president and first lady arrived for this evening's concert at the Lincoln Memorial, just a couple of miles from here, preparing to step into history.
Everything now is different. The president-elect flying directly into Andrews Air Force Base. His private Trump-branded plane a thing of the past. By noon tomorrow, this will be America's new first family. Trump's 10-year-old son Barron leading the way. And then, after a brief wave, Donald Trump, America's 45th president, and his Slovenian wife Melania followed. It is 71 days since his stunning and improbable election victory. And America's next commander-in-chief had a first chance to practice his official salute before heading into Washington. This afternoon, he paid his respects at the tomb of the unknown soldier at Arlington's National Cemetery. Perhaps this is the moment for an incoming president when the immensity of the responsibility becomes clearest. 400,000 fallen soldiers are buried here, including from America's current wars. In the city itself, on the west side of Capitol Hill, the stage is now set for the handover of power. But tomorrow comes with a degree of uncertainty rarely seen in the United States, for almost no one believes the Trump presidency will be conventional or predictable. And if you doubt that, just listen to how Trump announced today who would become America's next ambassador to Britain. Diplomatic protocol discarded, he made it public as a jokey aside.
So sitting next to the ambassador, Woody Johnson, Court of St. James, congratulations to you.
Meanwhile, the Vice President-elect, Mike Pence, tried to reassure Americans that the new administration is fully prepared for any crisis or emergency.
Our job is to be ready on day one. The American people can be confident that we will be.
The political battle lines are already being drawn. The Democratic leader in the Senate accusing the Trump team of major ethical lapses and of appointing fellow billionaires to the most important positions.
The president-elect isn't draining the swamp with his cabinet picks. He's filling it up.
Think about Muslims.
The other arena for Trump opponents will be on the streets. Last night, activists dressed in the infamous garb of the KKK accused the new administration of having links to the far right and to the white supremacist movement. And elsewhere in the city, others are highlighting the threat they see to America's LGBT community. But the major protests are planned for Saturday, when tens of thousands will take to the streets. Tonight, the pre-inauguration ceremonies are already underway, including at the Lincoln Memorial. But the patriotism on display will do nothing to hide the deep divisions generated by this election. While up to 1 million Trump supporters will gather here tomorrow, many other Americans are watching events with anxiety, fearing that this presidency is one of the country's greatest ever gambles. Robert Moore, News at 10, Washington.
Through the weeks of build-up to tomorrow's inauguration, there have been widely differing estimates of how many people will actually turn out. There'll be some protesters among the 800,000 or 900,000 strong crowd for sure. That could make things pretty lively. But Trump supporters will be out in force whatever for their moment in the sun or rain, according to the forecast. So they'll be converging on the Capitol from across the United States, from big cities and small towns.
Oh, that's great!
The DeFranco sisters don't like much about Washington, but they're heading there to see their man take office and reclaim the city and the country for people like them. Mary Ellen is a doctor.
I have hope for the first time in a long time that things can change, that things can get better. Like things get better for my daughter, for my grandchildren. And I didn't have that hope, to be honest, for a very long time.
Joanna remembers when 25,000 people worked at the town's steel plant. Now no one works there. But Bethlehem, Pennsylvania has a new king who calls himself the King of Jobs.
Can he deliver? That's when it begins there.
I think if anybody can, he can. I think he has a drive, and I think he has a genuine concern for the United States.
Donald Trump owes people in communities like Bethlehem his victory. And now Middle America's waiting for Washington to listen to them. John Steinmetz had never voted until Donald Trump, watching 16 elections come and go from the safety of his man cave where he restores old cars.
So what was it about Mr. Trump that got you up and out?
Well, he's not a politician, for one thing. And I think the politicians are the ones that are ruining the country.
He's going to shake them up.
He's going to shake them up, which he has already done that.
Do you think they look a bit rattled?
Oh, yeah, they are ruffled. You see it on the news every day. They are ruffled.
At the local pizza parlour, Lawrence Napoli's optimistic the new president will prioritise the needs of the people above the interests of what he calls the elite.
We won, and we're pretty happy about that. So I see him as being another President Reagan to her generation. That's why I always say to her.
And his customers, who also support the new president, accept that change will take time.
You can't undo what has been done for a long, long time overnight. But there must be a beginning, and this is the hope of this gentleman, President-elect Trump, is that he will at least begin that process.
Isn't your country in a perilous position? It's so divided.
I'm believing we're going to have more unity, more jobs. I think it's like happy days are here again once he comes in.
The town's buses are being prepared, ready to carry hundreds tomorrow to Washington to see history. Those who felt left behind here have a new American dream. Penny Marshall, News at 10, Pennsylvania.
There is little doubt Donald Trump has been a divisive figure, to this point at least. We'll find out in his address tomorrow how he plans to counter that. There are worries he might inflame mistrust. Relations between certain police forces and African-American communities have been tense, to say the least, during the Obama years. In his final report on the hopes and fears of America for the Trump presidency, Martin Geisler has been to the location of a notorious police shooting, the Missouri town of Ferguson. There, police think Mr. Trump will be very much on their side, and African Americans are anxious about what exactly that means for them.
Ferguson in Missouri is a sleepy little community, quiet, diverse and peaceful, but it hasn't always been like this. In August 2014, the whole world came to know this small town's name. A young black man had been shot by a police officer, his body left in the road for hours. Before long, public anger boiled over and spread.
We're not free!
The Ferguson riot sparked activism nationwide. The Black Lives Matter movement was born on these streets, and it'll prove a major challenge for Donald Trump because the simmering tensions here are still common across this country. In a bar in the town, I met with two men who found themselves at the centre of the chaos. Tom Jackson was Ferguson's police chief at the time, but resigned when a government report found his force to be institutionally racist. A stitch-up, he says. He was hung out to dry by an Obama administration who backed protesters over police.
They treated us like the enemy, and they did that from the very beginning. I think we were just thrown under the bus. I have never in my life seen law enforcement just kicked to the curb so quickly as it seemed like the collective of government did.
His colleague Kurt Frizz was in charge of the SWAT teams in Ferguson. He's still in uniform and says fellow officers are delighted they'll be serving a new president from tomorrow.
I think everybody's got, it's optimistic right now in law enforcement. I think everybody's anxious to get through the inauguration and move beyond that, and I think it's optimistic for the future.
Because he's got your back?
Because we feel like someone's got our back.
That, police insist, means proper law enforcement, but others here believe it spells trouble.
Where this big black spot is where his body lay.
He was shot here?
Right here. You just passed.
Activist Tory Russell came to Ferguson after Michael Brown's death and helped lead the protests for months. He believes Trump's election victory has emboldened the police already. You can feel it, he says. His is an extreme voice, but he insists he and others in these suburbs are prepared to meet force with force.
My belief, if it's more police killing, more police aggression, then after a while black people are going to raise up. And in Ferguson's and in Baltimore, it's going to be every day. You know, I always said that if they're going to kill people and treat people their way every day, then Ferguson should be everybody's new normal.
Of course, it's up to the police to ensure that doesn't happen. But the man now in charge of the force here says the new president must play his part too.
The president sits in Washington. If he says something or does something that ignites a fire in small-town USA, that small town has got to deal with it, and it's got to deal with the aftermath of that.
So while all is quiet here, for now, there are constant reminders of how quickly that can change. Donald Trump, incendiary by nature, must make sure he doesn't light the fuse. Martin Geisler, News at 10, Ferguson, Missouri.
Well, for Mr. Trump and his family, it is, of course, going to be a very busy 24 hours indeed. Tonight, a short time ago, he arrived at the Lincoln Memorial for the inaugural concert. It's hard to recall a time when who was going to play what when has been quite so politicised. Of course, a lot of entertainers who were asked to perform, it is said, pulling out under pressure from colleagues and criticism. But there is Mr. Trump sitting in the front row watching the concert a short time ago. The actor John Voight came out with his own denunciation of Mr. Trump's critics and said how proud he was to be introducing this particular concert, the first of 24 hours of frenetic activity for the new First Family. Well, Robert Moore joins me now. Robert, President Obama always said that you can't really prepare yourself for when you walk into the Oval Office and it changes you. Do you think it's going to change Mr. Trump?
Well, that's exactly right. I mean, Mr. Obama always used to say, walk into the Oval Office for the first time, sit behind the resolute desk, as it's known, for the first time, and your character is forever changed. Just because of the awesome responsibility of the presidency. But we've said that many times before, Tom, about Donald Trump. We said it when he won the Republican nomination. We said it before the presidential debates. We said it, of course, when he won the November election as well. And he never did pivot to become less of a maverick figure, less impulsive. You know, it's true to say that he continued to, with these kind of Twitter provocations, he continued to attack icons of American life. Even today, he's caused outrage amongst the Latino community with the confirmation that he has no Hispanic serving in his cabinet. So I think, you know, the world and, of course, Americans must be ready for a presidency like no other.
Now, many people voted for him, and many of his supporters are coming here because he says he's going to make America great again. Part of that, not all of it, but part of it's about economics, massive tax cuts and all the rest of it. Hard to get through, and he's a political novice here. How do you think he's going to find actually governing?
Well, that's the point, isn't it? He set the bar with that phrase, make America great again, exceptionally high. He's talked about, you know, returning millions of jobs to the Rust Belt, to the Midwest. He's talked about reinventing entire industries like coal and steel, about, you know, just completely transforming the tax code as well. But the problem is, of course, he is politically inexperienced. He can be outmaneuvered by his opponents and by other actors like Russia and China. And other events can intervene. You know, an ICBM launch from North Korea, a clash in the South China Sea, and all of a sudden his domestic agenda can be hijacked, and all of his aims and goals can suddenly be in peril.
Okay, well, it will be a fascinating day tomorrow, probably a fascinating 4 years for you, Robert, but for now, thank you very much indeed. Well, ever since the presidential elections, and perhaps even before that, the countries of the Baltic states have been watching with growing alarm Donald Trump cozying up to Russia and his criticism of NATO. They are worried, frankly, that if President Putin decides to send Russian troops over their borders, President Trump won't stand up for them. Only this week, Lithuania announced it was going to build a fence of its own in the hope, however vain, of trying to keep them out.
They take defence a lot more seriously in Lithuania these days. Conscription is back, a standing army is being rebuilt, defence spending is rising rapidly. This all started before anyone even thought of a Trump presidency. But with a man in the White House who considers NATO obsolete and President Putin on their doorstep, they fear for a future without an American defence guarantee.
Every year, as more conscripts get trained and battle-ready, the Lithuanians become better able to look after their own defence. But compared to the enemy they're likely to face, the numbers are still pitifully small.
Lithuanians know the wrath of Moscow all too well. Just 26 years ago this month, the most recent attempt by Special Forces troops to seize the TV station and oust the government ended with 13 dead, among them children.
That night at 2 o'clock, 4 tanks came here. You can see that there are some marks of bullets.
These are still left over from 1991.
Yes.
Marius Malakavicius was one of those trying to keep the broadcasts on air that night.
What would your message be to Donald Trump about the nature of the Russian threat?
Oh, I think he must have more knowledge from the people that know the situation.
And here they live with Russians on the doorstep. Just across this border, Putin has reinforced the garrison and sent a new battery of missiles, each capable of carrying nuclear warheads.
This is where the Lithuanians are going to build their 6-foot-high razor-wire fence the length of this border. They saw what happened in Ukraine when people, volunteers, even soldiers, could infiltrate across an open frontier.
But to hear Trump describe NATO, the only protector of Lithuania and the other Baltic states, as obsolete, has clearly shaken the government here.
No American president has ever said anything like this before.
Yes, you're right.
And no American president has ever sounded quite so like Vladimir
I'm not
Putin.
downplaying. I'm not downplaying what was said.
Do you believe that Donald Trump would order the U.S. forces to defend you?
The words of President Bush, that those who will choose Lithuania as an enemy will be the enemy of the United States. I hope it will not be corrected.
Those words have been engraved on a plaque on the wall of City Hall in Vilnius. To Lithuanians, it's the physical embodiment of the US and European guarantee. Starting tomorrow, they will, for the first time, have reason to doubt it. They're already preparing for the day they may have to stand alone, not for the first time, against a powerful and aggressive neighbour. James Mates, News at 10, Lithuania.
Now to Davos, where Brexit and the Prime Minister's big speech about it on Tuesday has been reverberating around the World Economic Forum. Today, Mrs May told our political editor, Robert Peston, the deal she wants to negotiate will keep London as a strong financial centre. Yesterday, some city banks made clear what they thought, saying they would probably switch staff to other European capitals.
The World Economic Forum, where the global elite come to sort out the world. Now this year, there's an unexpected, perhaps reluctant recruit to this exclusive club.
It's my first Davos, yes, so I didn't quite know what to expect.
The point is that in her last speech to Tory conference, she implied that the bankers and billionaires who come here are part of the problem, not the solution.
When you said just a couple of months ago that citizens of the world are citizens of nowhere, were you thinking about the chief executives and leaders who come to Davos?
The point I was making, which is a point that I made in my speech here at Davos today, is about businesses looking and taking responsibility and recognising their obligations to how people are being treated in their supply chains, even if those are in other countries across the world.
There are people here who say you can't both be a liberal and be so tough on immigration.
If we look at free trade and globalisation, the benefits that that brings, we have to accept that there are some people who feel it's left them behind. They are also concerned about ensuring we have control of immigration. But we also want to show that free trade does bring prosperity, but people expect to see companies playing by the same rules as ordinary working families.
Absolutely take your word that you want to promote free trade, but they see leaving the single market as a great act of protectionism.
It's not at all. Indeed, what I've set out earlier this week is that when we leave the European Union, I want us to have a free trade agreement with the European Union, which will enable us to have the maximum access for trading with and operating within the single European market.
Some have said you've got to offer a bit of preferential access, at least, to Europeans in terms of entry to this country.
We're looking at the rules that we will put in place in relation to immigration, but what is crucial is that we will have a system where it is the British government that makes those decisions.
Banks saying they're moving quite a lot of people outside the UK. Can you persuade them to change their minds?
Well, I've had a positive meeting with a number of CEOs of banks and other financial institutions here at Davos. I'm confident that we can negotiate a good trade agreement with the European Union that will enable us to continue to see that strong financial services sector in the City of London.
But as we leave the European Union, the Prime Minister's relationship with the US President seems more important than ever. And it won't be long before she meets the new one, Donald Trump.
One of the things that, again, seems to differentiate you from Donald Trump is you say free trade brilliant. Some see him as a protectionist. Are you going to give him a lecture on the benefits of free trade?
Well, what I expect to be talking to Donald Trump about when we meet is actually the enthusiasm that America has shown for a trade agreement with the United Kingdom. I think that's very important for us, and we will be keen to have those discussions.
Prime Minister, many thanks.
Thank you.
Before she spoke to Robert, Mrs May addressed a rather larger audience of business leaders in one of the main speeches of the day. Our economics editor, Narina Hertz, is also in Davos. Narina, how did her free trade message go down?
Well, unsurprisingly, the business leaders I spoke to today welcomed that message. But the speech was light on detail, on the how, the what, the when. So it was very interesting to speak to Barclays chairman John McFarlane, who shed some light on the detail. He told me that the UK government now understood, accepted and embraced a 3-year transitional period for financial services. This is something the government has not yet made public, but he warned that if the UK and EU trade deal struck was not right, Barclays would enlarge some of its existing EU operations, presumably at the cost of at least some jobs in the UK. Another man with a warning for the UK today was President of the Eurogroup, Jeroen Dijsselbloem. He told me that the negotiation process would be long and hard and that the ultimate outcome would inevitably be worse than the arrangement we currently have. Now, those were not words that Britain's business leaders would be welcoming.
Inevitably worse, indeed. Not, Narina. Thank you very much indeed for now. Now, a frantic search has been going on all day in the mountains of central Italy for survivors and sadly bodies too, after a huge avalanche buried, then crushed a ski hotel with its staff and guests inside. So far, 2 bodies have been found. Rescue workers who could only get there on skis say there are no signs of life in the ruins, but they haven't given up hope of finding more of the 30 missing alive. Back home with you in the UK, last week Martin McGuinness triggered the collapse of Northern Ireland's power-sharing government by stepping down as Deputy First Minister. He said concerns about his poor health had had no impact on his decision. But today he announced he was walking away from politics as he tries to recover from what he called a very serious illness. It means the end of a singular political career, that of a former IRA commander in a bloody campaign against British rule in Northern Ireland, who became a negotiator and linchpin of peace.
No one in Northern Ireland made the journey from violent to peaceful politics so successfully as Martin McGuinness. But this evening he announced his career in frontline politics was effectively over.
This has taken a serious toll on me in the course of recent times, and the honest answer is that I'm not physically able to fight an intensive election campaign over the course of the next 5 or 6 weeks, so I will not be a candidate in the forthcoming elections.
By the age of 21 in 1972, McGuinness admits he was already the second in command of the Provisional IRA in Londonderry. And even when he moved to the political side of the Republican movement, he was a hardliner.
At the end of the day, it will be the cutting edge of IRA which will bring freedom.
But that put him in the ideal position, along with Gerry Adams, to persuade the IRA to eventually embrace peaceful politics. In time, he and Ian Paisley surprised everyone by not only going into government together, but apparently enjoying it. Yet he still believes unionists have a long road to travel.
A word that I rarely hear from any of them is the word reconciliation. And that presented huge difficulties for me, because here was I, reaching out, even putting Republicans under pressure by some of the things that I'd done, meeting with Queen Elizabeth on a number of occasions.
Though some will always loathe McGuinness for his IRA past, he has won the respect of many former enemies. And his journey from IRA commander to Deputy First Minister is one of the most remarkable in recent Irish history. Carl Dinnan, News at 10.
Certainly have been very few careers like it. Now, if you had to name the first council to confront the government over cuts in social care, Tory-controlled Surrey might not be top of the list. But it has thrown down something of a challenge, saying it will have to put up council tax by 15% to meet the shortfall. That would add nearly £200 to the average Band D bill. First, though, Surrey has to hold a referendum to get approval.
It may be one of the richest parts of the country, but in Surrey this afternoon there was disbelief at the prospect of council tax bills going up by 15%.
Well, what can you say? Who would want a 15% hike in their council tax?
No, that's a big chunk of money, and I think for a lot of people that will be too much.
Well, it's outrageous, isn't it, eh?
A shock maybe, but the council leader hopes they will back his tax rise in a referendum this May. He says it's the only way to stave off further cuts.
I certainly know the books in Surrey. I've been doing them long enough now, and I know that we do need this money. We have a gap which we cannot fund without asking the residents to help us. It is for them that we're doing this, not for us.
A 15% rise would put up bills to 5%, 3% of which is ring-fenced for social care. Cabinet ministers whose constituents would be affected include Philip Hammond, Chris Grayling and Jeremy Hunt. The Health Secretary also happens to be the man who the council blame for big cuts in social care they've already had to make. This is the reality of years of cuts. A care home for the elderly set to close its doors this summer. And it's not alone. Surrey County Council is set to act 6 in all, it says, to help balance the books. And it's why some say they will vote yes in the referendum.
I think if it's going for useful purposes like social care for the elderly, I think it would be worth voting for, definitely.
But whether a majority agree with that is far from certain. Libby Vina, News at 10, Surrey.
Back here in Washington, things are going to be very different during a Trump presidency. We've said it many times since the presidential election, not least, of course, his relationship with the media. He's already bypassing reporters using Twitter, and he has dished out plenty of put-downs. So what might it be like reporting on President Trump? I've been finding out from some of those who've been on the receiving end of his outbursts. In less than 24 hours now, Americans will have a new president. And if many wait nervously to find out what difference Donald Trump is going to make, then members of the media wait more than most. Because let's face it, he really doesn't like them.
Most of it, 70%, 75%, is absolute dishonest, absolute scum. Remember that. Scum. Scum.
The world's most dishonest people are back there. Look at all the cameras going. Not you. Your organization's terrible. Your organization's terrible. Let's go.
For the moment, for the American media, it's feeling a bit like a war.
Right now, Donald Trump supporters are booing the mainstream media as they came into the arena. This is amazing.
He called me a dishonest slime bag, a scumbag, true garbage with no credibility. You know, politicians always complain about reporters. They always complain about their coverage. But Trump seems to take it personally in a way that's very unusual, and he holds on to it for so long.
There are tricky questions for venerable newspapers like the Washington Post. Mostly presidential statements have been taken at face value as indications of intent. But what about Mr. Trump's many tweets? They have, of course, run the gamut from America's nuclear weapons through to attacks on the CIA, right back to the days of questioning the veracity of Mr. Obama's birth certificate.
We need to take a critical eye to the things that he says, especially on Twitter, and think about what is the purpose of this and what are all of the potential purposes for this. Kind of run those scenarios through our mind. But what is he trying to do here? Is he trying to start a conversation about X topic, or is this really more about keeping the conversation away from Z topic?
One thing is for sure for the media, as for everyone else here, it's not going to be business as usual. And tomorrow afternoon, I'll be presenting a special program, Donald Trump, the inauguration, live from here in Washington. It's on ITV at 4 o'clock. And that is it for tonight on the eve of Inauguration Day. This time tomorrow there will be a new president in the White House. The Obama era will be over. At the heart of this great political shift, there is, of course, personal upheaval too. The Obamas, the first family, will be spending their last night in the government building that has been their home these past 8 years. The president leaves with his highest approval rating since the first summer of his first term, as America realizes perhaps you don't always appreciate what you've got until it's gone. Now, as Mr. Trump takes over, this country is holding its collective breath. I think it's fair to say no one really knows what happens next. What we do know is America is set for a dramatic change, and that begins on the steps of the Capitol building tomorrow. Until then, from me, good night, and thank you very much indeed for watching.